Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. In breaking news, Brazil's Senate voted 61-20 to remove President Dilma Rousseff from office. Vice President and acting President Michel Temer, a conservative, will probably be sworn in this afternoon to take Rousseff's place for the remainder of her term until 2018. The impeachment of Brazil's first female president has divided a country that is undergoing severe political and economic crises. Protests in support of Rousseff and her own testimony yesterday in Senate did not deter the senators from their final vote and the outcome to impeach her. So now joining me to discuss the unfolding news is Sidney Chalhoub. He is a professor of history and of African and African American studies at Harvard University. I thank you so much for joining us, Professor.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
So, Professor, as we speak, there's riot police outside of the Senate firing tear gas at the crowds that have gathered who oppose the decision that the Senate has taken against President Dilma Rousseff to impeach her. Do you think this is a sign of things to come in Brazil?
Well, it's very hard to say. I think everybody in Brazil has a very clear they know very well that the legal basis for this impeachment is very weak or non-existent. This has been a divisive issue for a long time now. And however, it's very hard to know whether people are going to be out on the street protesting, because this process has also been very tiring, very difficult for everybody. And what is going to happen next is going to depend a lot on what the right-wing government that is now in power without having been elected, how aggressively this government is going to push this right-wing agenda that they have is going to be decisive about what's going to be happening in the next few months.
Now, what was indicative, Professor, throughout this whole process since May, when they first removed President Dilma Rousseff from office temporarily and started this process? During this time, the only thing that has become absolutely clear is that while President Dilma might have juggled some accounts back and forth that various other presidents in the country have also done in the past, that she had not actually done anything that constitutes a crime of any significant nature. But what this period has also exposed is a number of other political figures in the country that are tied up in various accusations of corruption and corruption scandals, including Vice President Michel Temer, who's about to take office himself, who's been told by the courts or declared by the courts that he himself cannot run for office for the next 2 years as well. Yeah. So what has this exposed in terms of Brazilian politics, and will the current governing politicians be able to withstand this against the protests that are going on outside?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the interesting aspect of this process and the sad aspect of this process is that perhaps Dilma is one of the most honest or a politician about whom nothing was really found out of any importance in terms of corruption charges against her. And the people who are against her, and senators in the Chamber of Deputies and the vice president, are all people who have been very seriously involved in corruption charges. So, and Dilma, I think, even these budgetary manipulations that they tell that she was engaged with, one thing that is people must pay attention to is that the legal basis for the impeachment had to do with 2015. And in 2015, not even these budgetary manipulations were proved. So the charges about 2014 were discarded when the impeachment process was accepted by the Chamber of Deputies. So the whole legal aspect is completely debased. I mean, there's no base for it. So I think in terms of corruption charges, Dilma is paying a very heavy price for the fact that herself and the Workers' Party in general has strengthened the institutions in Brazil in charge of investigating corruption. So the federal police and the judiciary have had conditions to conduct investigations and to go after corrupt politicians in ways that they had never had before. And also, actually, there's a very important episode when, right after Temer took power, when one of his main ministers, called Romero Jucá, was caught in a tape saying that Dilma, a tape that was made before, of course, Dilma was suspended, saying that it was very necessary to bring down Dilma exactly because she doesn't do anything against the judges and the federal police, the people who are in charge of investigating corruption. So in many ways, what you have here is really the process going upside down. I mean, the corrupt individuals are getting rid of a very honest president because they want to stop corruption. So it's very ironic that the fact that corruption has been investigated so thoroughly in Brazil in the past few years leads to this type of result, at least immediately, which is a real triumph for the people who want to defend themselves against corruption charges.
Now, of course, President Dilma Rousseff is going to most likely appeal this decision to the highest court in the country. Do you think that is going to be a process that is going to be more fair than the one that she has just undergone?
Well, it's hard to say. The Supreme Court has tried to adopt a very careful conduct in this process, trying not to interfere. However, this has brought up other problems. For example, Eduardo Cunha, who was the deputy who led the process in the Chamber of Deputies, has been accused of corruption charges, and the Supreme Court took 140 days. They seem to have waited the process in the Chamber of Deputies to go through in order to proceed with the charges against them. This is something that has been heavily criticized in terms of the conduct of the Supreme Court. There is also some legal controversies. I mean, some people think that the Supreme Court oversaw all these formal aspects of the impeachment process, but it should not give an opinion regarding the content itself of the process, because this is a political impeachment is a political process, and it wouldn't make sense for the Supreme Court to evaluate what the Senate has already evaluated in political terms. But this is also very ambiguous because the law of the impeachment, the way it is described in the Constitution, says that for the impeachment to take place, you must have a legal basis, and then the political evaluation makes sense. Since there is a lot, as I said, there is a lot of questions about the legal basis of the impeachment process. It may happen that the Supreme Court thinks that it can evaluate this aspect, the legal aspect of the process. And then I don't know what's going to happen. But I confess that I'm not optimistic. I mean, what this process has been showing is that in contrast to what many of us believed, democratic institutions in Brazil are not working. I mean, they are formally in place. There is a democratic facade, which is for the world to see. But what we also saw in the past few months is that sectors of the judiciary, the legislative, the media, they all were able to take a concerted stand to bring down a government whose major fault has been to put forward very aggressive social policies to reduce social inequality in Brazil. And then, and including these initiatives to allow corruption investigations to go ahead without the executive trying to impeach them. So unfortunately, I cannot be very optimistic about the next steps as to whether there can be any justice made to President Dilma in the Supreme Court, even if in case the Supreme Court decides to actually investigate or examine the impeachment in terms of its legal basis. If it does that, then something can happen. But I don't believe they will find a way of saying that they cannot go in. They oversaw the formal aspect, but they should not have an interference in the political content of the process.
Professor Chalhoub, I thank you so much for joining us today. We have a lot more to unpack in terms of what's going on in Brazil, further sort of the historical context of how Brazil has gotten here and similar historical moments Brazil has experienced. But we are in a rush to get this out to the press right away. So we are hoping to come back to you again very soon to give us more of that context. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.